Some bullies tried to shove their nuts down my son's throat, so I rearranged their guts. My son had autism, but even worse, he had a peanut allergy. Somehow no one knows this, but it's actually a pretty deadly combo. You see, when my son came home from his elementary school, I noticed he had rashes on his arms. When I asked him what happened, he could barely communicate it to me. Peanuts. I ate, was all he managed to say. I figured that he had forgotten he was allergic to peanuts and had eaten his friends, because this was something that happened once in a while. So I rubbed some soothing, mainly placebo cream, and he was back to normal. "Thank you so much, Daddy," he said, flapping his arms in the air. I hugged him back, and the next morning I left a large photo of peanuts in his bag with a red X through it, as a reminder that he's allergic. Except the next day, it got even worse. Not only was there a large rash covering his arms, legs, and face, but his tongue had also swelled up to almost double the size. It could barely even fit in his mouth. Luckily, I had the patience of a worm, so I reapplied the cream and held up ice until things were back to normal. "Daddy," his voice was sheepish, like he was scared or something. It wasn't my fault, and instead of giving me further explanation, he just burst into tears. I nodded and reassured him that all he had to do was stop eating peanuts, and he would be okay. Up until this point, Mikey had no issue with listening to what I told him to do. So when he didn't even nod or make eye contact with me, an awful gut feeling washed over me. So that evening I called the SNA, special needs assistant, at his school. I asked if she could keep a lookout for Mikey during lunchtime, and she promised she would. The next day, she sent me a video. I opened it in the bathroom during work, and suddenly, tears were covering my entire phone screen. So much so that it started moving by itself. Because right there were the bullies of the 5th grade. They were pouring peanuts into my son's hands, and telling them if he didn't eat them, they were going to unalive him. They were skinny, small effers. But my son was yet to understand the concept of people saying stuff without meaning it. So there he was, shoving them down his throat, his face stained with tears. The video ended when the SNA realized what was going on and walked over to them. She told me she was putting them in detention, but unfortunately, this wasn't enough for me, because I think anyone who is cowardly enough to harm someone completely defenseless deserves to suffer, especially if that someone is my son. And luckily, I worked in a warehouse filled with ex-cons willing to make some extra cash. So right after watching the video, I talked to my buddy Malik. I didn't say anything, just showed him the video. He almost looked even more disgusted than I did, because he loved my son. He'd come over to babysit multiple times, and Mikey loved him too. For context, he wasn't arrested for anything crazy. He had simply been caught stealing $200 worth of food for his family. He told me he wasn't going to do it himself, but he knew a few kids from juvie who were also in 5th grade who'd be more than willing. For the next few days, nothing changed. Mikey was still coming home with severe peanut allergies that were only getting worse. Apparently the teachers were too scared of the kids to do anything, so poor Mikey was left completely unguarded. But the next week, something changed. Mikey didn't come home with any signs of allergies, just some marks on his fists, like he had punched someone. I called Malik, and when he picked up the phone, he was laughing so loudly it hurt my ears. He told me that the juvie kids went in as school ended looking for trouble, and as soon as the bullies saw them walk closer, they immediately backed down. But the juvie kids ended up sucker punching them in the stomach for good measure. Then, they riled up my son Mikey by throwing grass at him, and this ended up overstimulating him so much that he beat up the juvie kids. The kids let him do it. So when the bullies saw it all go down, they got so scared that it was obvious they had no intention of ever harming my son again. I was filled with a strange sense of pride. I knew Mikey could stand up for himself. All he needed was a little push. I immediately hung up and brought him to his favorite diner. We ordered Mickey Mouse-shaped pancakes, and he had a huge smile on his face. But the next day, Mikey came home with even larger marks on his fists. There was red on his t-shirt, and it didn't seem like it was his. Panic filled my lungs. "Mikey, what happened?" "I did it, Daddy. I stood up for myself again." I was so shocked I couldn't even move. "Was it the kids again?" I asked, hoping for the best. "Nope. They were so scared they didn't come near me. I broke my pen and asked the girl beside me if she had one I could borrow. She said no, so I beat her up after school when no one was looking. I buried my face in my hands. It was at that point that I realized why violence is never the answer is such a strong cliche. "Daddy, why aren't you replying to me?" Mikey yelled, before punching me in the stomach so hard I fell to the floor. The rest of the full story is on my channel and linked below.